Hi, I'm Kitsap County Commissioner Rob Gelder, and welcome to this episode of Commissioner's Corner. And joining me today is Will Basler, who is Kitsap County's PreTrial Services Program Coordinator. Will, thank you so much for joining the program today.
Hey, thanks for having me today.
I think it's one of those, what is PreTrial Services? When you came to the board not too long ago and did a briefing, I thought this was a great topic, but probably one that most of the folks in the county may not have any familiarity with. So would you mind kind of starting off and sharing with our viewers today a little bit about what pretrial services are and what it is that you do?
No problem. So PreTrial Services interacts with defendants who are going through Superior Court in Kitsap County. These are people who've been accused of a crime but not yet convicted, so they're still kind of going through the criminal legal process. We do two main functions currently, which is we do the bail study. It's an initial screening that happens. So a defendant gets arrested the night before, the day before. Next morning, I go into the jail. I interview them, just figure out where they're going to be staying, figure out if they have employment, and then I will later compile their criminal record for the judge and put it together in a report called a bail study.
Okay.
I also work with the defendant to interview the defendant to see if they're eligible for a public defender, and that's just a financial screening to see if they qualify for a public defender. And then I go over the defendant's rights with them while they're in custody. Once that happens, I present the report to the court for the 3 o'clock arraignment calendars, and the judge and the prosecutor in the public defender's office will use that information to determine what bail or what pretrial release conditions that defendant is eligible for. The other big thing that we do is we help defendants with navigation of the services available to them. I always like to say that the criminal justice system begins where human services have failed. And so the goal is we're hoping to capture defendants when they're most likely to make a change. You know, I, again, always joke that when's someone most likely to want to make a change? Well, it's generally about 5 seconds before they have to go tell the judge what's going to be different this time, right? And so the idea is that we want to catch defendants while they have a high level of motivation and introduce them to services that may help them, stuff like mental health treatment, rehab, homelessness services. A lot of times getting people phones is a big one. And then help them get involved in those services while that level of motivation is high. So even once they get through the criminal legal process, they'll already be connected and they'll have the ability to continue with the changes they're making in their life. This is really important because oftentimes it can be very difficult for our defendants to navigate that. And frustration leads to quitting, right? And so anything we can do to help make that a more smooth transition from in custody, court, pretrial services, into the community where they can get the services they need is important.
So it's kind of looking at in terms of a timeline from the moment they're booked and then whether or not they remain in custody or are released on bail. Is bail and pretrial services, are those mutually exclusive or is it all part of the same thing?
The goal with pretrial services is to give the court tools, right? We don't do bail. We're not a bail agency. We're not a bail bondsman. But bail is a tool that may be used in correlation with pretrial services. We're more trying to orient ourselves around supportive services for defendants. Things like making sure defendants have a bus pass to get to court, making sure that they have a phone and know how to use it, helping them put their court dates into the calendar in their phone so that they can get a reminder before court. Down the road, we're looking to implement a court date reminder program so that defendants who are at a higher risk of not showing up to court are getting reminded a couple of days before court and the day before court. And when you look at the research on that, you really see that's like the number one thing you can do to increase court rate appearance, or court appearance rates. And so it's really important to, it's really about that connection. Bail is kind of, an insurance that you come to court. We're there to support the defendant as they're trying to get to court and as they're trying to do the things they need to do to be successful in pretrial.
Okay, great. So why are pretrial services within the county's Human Services Department?
That's a great question. So Washington State's Ethics Board came out with Ethics Decision 1804, and it basically sums down to is it's not the court shouldn't have staff talking to defendants before they have a chance to have an attorney, even if it's to do something like a pretrial screening or a bail study. In this ethics decision, though, they made a carve out for hiring a neutral agency or having a neutral agency do those bail study interviews or do those pre-arraignment interview screenings. And that's where we came in. So in every county in Washington, they do it a little bit differently. Some departments have their probation department handle it. Some courts have their clerk's office handle it, like Tacoma. We decided to put it in Human Services, which is, where we feel it's a good home. We do have the access to defendants with the bail study, and that allows us to connect them in the services and kind of turn, what used to be a cold handoff, hey, go here, show up, to hey, you know me, I'm the guy who talked to you, one of the first people who talked to you when you're in the jail. I'm also here to support you as you continue through this process. And it kind of creates a warm handoff, and it creates a sense of familiarity and comfortability. We've all been that moment where you have to go to a new place, right? Be a doctor's office or an appointment or whatever. And there's that level of anxiety of meeting a new people, what's going to happen, what's going on. And our goal is really kind of be there to ease that level of anxiety and to make it easy.
Okay. It seems like on some level, so the aim is really about the success of the defendant during this process.
Yeah.
And you are playing a role in pretrial services of really support, whether it's kind of a social service / social work / tech support, all of those types of things, just to make sure that they can follow through.
Yeah, good casework is, whatever, trying to figure out how to fit the client's needs. And every client is different. For one client, they may not need the whole bevy of social services. They just may need one specific piece, like a reminder to get to court. Another defendant may have intensive mental health issues. They may have a substance abuse addiction. They may be homeless. These are all things that make it more difficult to be successful in while you're going through the criminal legal system. And so the idea is that we want to reach these clients and help connect them into the resources that are going to then help them be successful, And, I think the way I always approach it is just, if they're there and they need help, we want to catch them now because they're not going to come back.
Right.
And so that's really the key thing is we have the access to them through the bail study. But because of that, we can also now start making those contacts and getting people into the services they need to hopefully get them out of the criminal legal system.
Cool. So I think one of the things our viewers may think that this is a really large program, but in fact, it's a small yet mighty program of one, being you. So what is it that, are you looking at changes that can be implemented to help support the program overall?
Yeah, there's 3 big tools we're looking to implement for the court within pretrial services that are kind of our 3 big projects we're working on right now. The first one is a client reminder program. As I said earlier, it is the number one thing you can do to increase someone's likelihood to court. A lot of people think people don't want to show up to court because they don't want to face the consequences of their actions or, there's something wrong. Most people miss their court dates because they forgot they had a court date. That's just, it's not exciting, but it's the truth, right? Most people just forget they have a court date. Now they have a warrant. Now they're getting arrested. Now they're back in jail, right? And so the idea is that by reminding defendants that they have court dates coming up, we can A, ensure that they're coming to court, but B, also help them troubleshoot those issues. Maybe, hey, I have court at 10:30, but my boss isn't gonna get me off the time. Now we can have a conversation about how to talk with your boss to let them know, like, hey, I need to do this, or I'm not gonna show up to work at all, right?
Right.
I kid. Hopefully that's not the case, but it's the idea is that we can have those conversations, or maybe a defendant's having issues getting to court, they can't get a car ride or they need a bus pass. We can kind of then circumvent those and go, okay, well, we can get you a bus pass. And then we'll also communicate with the attorneys. One of the very big blessings we've had in this program in our short time is we have a great relationship with the Office of Public Defense. And so, when we see an issue coming up with one of their defendants, we try and keep their attorney in the loop. Or if their defendant is telling us, hey, I want to get the service, we want to keep their attorney in the loop, because that way, when it comes to getting to court, they can advocate for the defendant, say, hey, he's doing this, or hey, my defendant's in jail, but we'll say you can get him an ASAM or a SUD assessment. If we get him into a treatment program, can we get him out of jail, right? And so we have this really great relationship with our partners in the justice system, and then that goes same for our office of the prosecutor's office and the sheriff's department. This is really a collaborative program, and it's really important that we have that collaboration there. I got a little off topic there, back to the main question.
No, that's right. But that's, I think it's all important information.
Yeah.
But so right now, a big part of it in terms of the success is that reminder system, which my impression is fairly manual, labor intensive.
We're starting it off. With a trial period where staff will be reaching out to defendants. And while that may sound staff and manual intensive, time hours intensive, it's about that relationship too. You get a call from someone. It's not a text. It's not automotive. Someone's checking in on you, right? That means something to a defendant, right? And it's really important to have that relationship. Those are relationship building moments. They may not always feel like it. But, I've worked in the criminal justice field for about 7 years. And, defendants really do notice that if you call them every week, or if you're calling them to remind them of their court dates, they notice these things. And even if they may not respond to it, they'll show up in your office eventually, go, hey, I really appreciate how you're always checking in on me. And so there's that aspect of it there, but also there is the aspect of it's just about making sure we can be troubleshooting with the defendant. We can be checking in with them, making sure that they're on track to be successful. And then again, it's another contact point to offer them a chance to get into the services that they need and make those connections. Eventually the goal is we will want to eventually automate it so that we can expand the program from a limited number of defendants to potentially anyone who's in superior court.
Okay.
And we're looking at options of how to do that. But currently at the time, we're going to focus on the smaller test program to see if it works in Kitsap County. What I will say is with these check-in programs, they have been successful. They have been successful in Yakima, in Washington. I believe Yakima saw like a 17% decrease in failure to appears since implementing their program. And so there is a lot of success within that one there. One of the other big changes we're looking at what kind of information we're giving the court. Right now, when a bail decision is being made, it's being made on kind of three main things. Does the defendant have a place to live? What does their criminal record look like? And what is their employment status, right? And so we're looking at adding and implementing a public safety assessment. We're looking at using the APPR, the Advancing Pretrial Research, or Advancing Pretrial Policy and Research, PSA into the county. It's a actuarial assessment that uses 9 factors to determine whether or not someone poses a risk to the community, whether or not they're going to show up to court, and whether or not if they do have the potential to reoffend, is that reoffense going to be violent? And so we like it because it's a fairly simple tool to implement. It has a lot of moving parts, but once you get in, it's a very simple tool to use. It gives you 3 numbers on a scale of 1 to 6, 6 being the highest risk, 1 being the lowest risk. And you can easily look at it and say, okay, this guy's a 1 on likelihood to show up to court. That means he's probably going to show up to court. He's a 2 on likelihood to reoffend, and he's a 2 on if that's going to be violent. And then you can suddenly have the information to make decisions. The judges will suddenly have information to make decisions on what sentencing guidelines they should use, or what, where bail should be set at, whether or not they should be checking in with a caseworker, whether or not they need to be put on a call reminder program. The idea is we're giving the judges better information when making those decisions.
Great.
Yeah.
Any other changes that you're focused on?
Yeah, the big one, the final kind of big one we're looking at is we're looking to create a defendant check-in program. And the idea behind this is a defendant can be ordered by the court to check in with a PreTrial Services caseworker a certain amount of times a week or a month, depending on the risk. Again, that's where that PSA piece comes into. We can look at where their risk level is and determine, you might only need to check in once a week, but you should be checking in every day. And so the idea is that they'll have a certain amount of times they have to check in with a caseworker in person or over the phone. And the idea is we're keeping an eye on people and providing support. Hey, how's it going? What's going well? And also having a case management component to that. The court, giving the court options to do things like, hey, I want you to get involved with drug treatment while you're going through your case, or hey, and that may or may not happen depending on, you have to remember these are people who are on pretrial release, so they're not sentenced. But we can still work with them while they're checking in with us, we're getting contact points to start accessing services. And we can even, at a certain level, do case management with them, some wraparound case management, connect them into the services that they may need.
I would imagine that their level of compliance with that also becomes a new data point that is shared with the courts.
Yeah.
If they're doing all their checking in consistently, et cetera, then.
Yeah, there will be reporting. So the big thing with our program is we have to be fair and balanced to each party. So there will be, when a status report or an update to the court would be made, it would be made to the judge, the public defender, the prosecutor's office, and the defendant. And we call it the separation of church and state. We want to make sure everybody gets everything. And so that's really our big thing, is the neutrality there, making sure that we're not leaving prosecution office out, we're not leaving OPD out, we're not leaving the court out. So there is that reporting thing. The other thing I want to emphasize here, this is not about setting people up for failure. We're not creating a stumbling block for defendants. This is not a probation program. We're not going to go PreTrial Services your PreTrial Services caseworker is not going to, be making arrests. We're not law enforcement. We're caseworkers. The idea is that we're here to support. So if a defendant is struggling, we'll report that to the court, but we'll also work to catch it. A lot of times, for example, with a drug relapse, right? Everyone thinks you relapse and suddenly you're gone for, the rest of your life or until you get into your next thing. A lot of times a relapse is a slip, right? And even when you look at the cycle of recovery, relapse is built into that, right? Because it's going to happen. And so what I always talk to my defendants, my former clients, when my other jobs is, hey, you slipped, you slipped. Now we got to determine if you're going to pick yourself back up or you're going to fall, right? And so by having those check-ins, by having those points of contact and having someone who's keeping, who's there to be supportive, we can catch them while they're slipping and then get them back on the track. And it might be something as simple as, hey, we need to look at what are you doing in your recovery that is working well, and maybe we need to increase that, or we need to look at what changed in your recovery that caused you to slip. What's the new stressor? Sure. What's the thing going on? And so by having those points of contact, by having those check-ins and showing that support and building that relationship, we can hopefully catch people before they completely fall and relapse.
Great. Right. You mentioned a couple of things. That A, this was a pilot. B, sort of this casework piece of it, and being that there's a caseworker of one currently. Are there standards out there and from other pretrial programs where there's a caseload that a caseworker can actually manage? So
you see this, it's different, as I said, it's different in every county. Kind of PreTrial Services is what we call the Wild West of criminal justice right now. I think it's us in restorative justice are kind of the Wild West in what's kind of being new and developed. And so, but there are places where they're showing that model of supportive services helps. San Francisco, for example, they have a very robust pretrial services department. It's actually a nonprofit that works with the county there. And their whole model revolves around these check-ins, revolves around client reminders, and then also connecting defendants to services within the community there. You see when places like Tacoma, there's that whole idea that they're doing these check-ins, they're doing the client reminders, and then they're working with defendants to help connect them to the services through the court's services program. When you look at the recommendations from the 2019 Washington State pretrial assessment, I believe the court did a thing on a report on how to improve pretrial services. The big three things they said were PSA, or some form of assessment when looking at defendants for release, call reminders, and then connecting defendants into social services. And that's mirrored by the National Association of PreTrial Services, as well as APPR, which is a Arnold Research Ventures supported program. And so there's a lot of research showing out there that these programs connecting defendants into social services, keeping in with them on check-ins, and doing client reminders. These are all things that increase pretrial success. Okay. And when you think about it, it really makes sense, because we're looking to approach the root causes of the criminal behavior versus just making sure it doesn't happen.
Right. So what evidence is there? I mean, you've talked about sort of a national association, et cetera, and some data must be gathered. Yeah. But what evidence is there to show that a service-based supportive approach to pretrial services actually works?
Yeah. So and as I said, talked to NASA does a ton of research on and hires people out to do a ton of research on these programmings. So they kind of become the standard for best practices in the field. APPR with their PSA, every county that implements one of the implementation steps is a verification that it works. Okay. And so there's generally they'll do a study about a year into it to validate it, and they do a long-term and a short-term validation study. And so any county that's using that is doing a validation study to ensure that their version of the PSA works within that county. On top of that, APPR has done a lot of research into best practices for criminal justice reform around pretrial services. And what I can say from my own personal experience, having worked around this for a minute, is that when you give people in the justice system access to services, it helps. This is share a little story from back when I worked in Santa Cruz. I did employment for felons, and I worked with the probation department down there doing probation for felons. And I had this guy, his name, I can't say his name, but he was a longtime Norteña member, did 20 years in prison in California for gang crime. First time I met him, I did my intake with him. Second time I met him, he cussed me out and told me he was never going to comply with my program. Third time I met him, I called him and spoke with him. He told me some information that was going to lead to him getting arrested and going back to jail for a long time. Now, this guy's probation officer cut him a huge break and said, you go into, at the time it was called the Probation Service Center, and you meet with these providers, these service providers, and I'm going to cut you a break, right? And so the guy, fourth time I talked to him, the guy's in my office, and he says, hey, well, you guys cut me a break, I'm cutting you a break, I'm going to give you a chance. He went through my employment class. He went through classes with CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy. He went to education to get his degree. And after working with this guy for about 2 years, last time I spoke to him, he was working 2 or 3 jobs as an in-home caregiver, working with the elderly. He hadn't used in a year and a half, and he was getting out of the treatment center he was in to get into his own housing.
That's awesome. Right.
This is a guy who gave 20 years of his life to the state, and as hard as they come, but when you put that support around him, you gave him the support he needed, you pushed him through, and there were a lot of moments where he wanted to quit, and I had to say, remember how you say you're gonna give me a chance? You gotta keep giving me that chance, right?
Yeah.
But there was a lot of moments there where he wanted to quit, but because he had the support around him, he was able to succeed.
Great. So what I'm taking away, and I hope the viewers take away as well, that this program is really based on making sure that we're focused on success. It is about support for the defendant and making sure that they're able to do that. And I think that's tremendous. And given it is new, I'm hopeful that you can come back maybe in another year or two and share kind of an update with our viewers, because I think this really is a starting point, but it has so much potential. And that's why I was excited to have you as part of the program. So thank you. We are out of time, unfortunately. And I wanted to thank you, Will, for being here at the program today. And for our viewers, do know that we'll have some web links, et cetera, because we threw out some acronyms and all that good stuff as part of the program. But if you would like to learn more, just check those out. And I hope you learned a lot. We'll see you next time.